The darkness of outer space was nothing compared to the chaos ravaging Darth Vader's inner world. Inside his helmet, echoes of the past returned incessantly. Padme, his lost love. The son he believed to be dead. All of this corroded what little remained of Anakin Skywalker inside that suffocating armor. Even surrounded by power, he felt imprisoned. Silently, he began to entertain a bold, dangerous idea, perhaps the last chance he would have to redeem himself and destroy the one truly responsible for his ruin. The Emperor, he took everything from me, Vader muttered, watching the reflection of his black helmet in a window of the Death Star. He knew that in his current state, with his body consumed by the flames of Mustafar and limited by his suit, he would never stand a chance against Darth Sidious. However, if a new Anakin existed, a young body free from physical limitations, then destiny could be rewritten. A new chosen one, but guided by him. A plan began to form. Imperial records still held data on the scientists of Kamino. Few remained after the purge ordered by the Empire, but the files were clear. Some geneticists had survived in laboratories hidden among the storms of the ocean planet. Vader left in secret, concealing his presence even from the Emperor's spies. He descended with his ship onto the submerged planet, where a solitary tower resisted time, silent and decaying. "You will help me, or you will die here," said Vader, emerging from the fog of the cloning chamber, his mechanical breathing terrifying the survivors. The scientists, weakened and with no way out, swore allegiance. They recovered the genetic data stored before the fall of Kamino and began the cloning process with a sample extracted from Vader himself. But there was one requirement. The child would need to have the same amount of midichlorians as the original Anakin. It was not enough to replicate the body. It was necessary to recreate the potential. The first tests failed miserably. The embryos degenerated within days. Some clones were deformed, others completely unstable in the Force. Vader watched each attempt impassively, suppressing the frustration that grew within him. He could not fail. Not after all he had lost. He began to personally oversee the process, adjusting details, demanding absolute precision. Time passed, but his determination remained unshaken. "I'm not looking for an army. I only need one," said Vader, staring coldly at the cloning tanks. He didn't want another apprentice, as he had with the Inquisitors. He wanted himself, but without the mistakes, without the chains, without the pain. With each failed attempt, the scientists wondered if they were facing an impossible miracle. However, even in the face of the impossible, Vader's twisted hope fed on pain and regret. The Emperor began to suspect. Some of Vader's absences did not go unnoticed. However, Sidious still believed that fear controlled him. And indeed it did, but not in the way he imagined. The fear of never repairing the past, of never defeating the true enemy, of forever being a puppet of darkness. That was the fear that drove Vader to continue. And with it, a spark of faith in the impossible. During one of the long observation sessions in the laboratories, one of the tanks began to react differently. The scientists rushed to the terminals. The levels were stable, cell growth was perfect. And most incredible of all, the midichlorian reading was identical to the original sample. For the first time, the data was conclusive. Vader approached slowly, feeling an intense vibration in the Force, something he hadn't felt since he was Anakin. "It's working," said one of the scientists, trembling. "It's a miracle." But Vader did not respond. He just stared at that back-to-tube where new hope was growing. The image was blurry, but he could make out shapes, arms, legs, and gradually the silhouette of a face he hadn't seen in decades. His own face, the face of a Jedi, the face of Anakin Skywalker. The silence in the chamber was broken only by Vader's mechanical breathing. He stood motionless in front of the tube as the blue light cast shadows from his helmet onto the forming face. Inside, a whirlwind of power and ambition grew. It was not just a replica. It was a weapon, an extension of his will, something that time, flames, and the suit could never give him back. Anakin's true body, reborn to accomplish what he could not finish. Destroy the Master and take the throne of the galaxy. "You will have no choice," whispered Vader, his voice heavy with authority. "You will be my ultimate weapon, and together, we will crush the Emperor." He slowly closed his fist, feeling the force vibrate around the tank. The cycle would begin again, but now he would be in control. The new Anakin would awaken, stronger, purer, more lethal. The plan was underway, and this time no one would stand in Darth Vader's way. After the success of the cloning, the atmosphere in the Kamino laboratories changed dramatically. The scientists became even more silent, fearing any mistake that could compromise the project or their own lives. Anakin's face could already be seen clearly, floating in the tank. But there was something beyond the biological happening. The force readings around the clone were becoming increasingly unstable. The entire environment seemed to react to his presence. The air vibrated, and the equipment malfunctioned frequently. Vader watched everything without saying a word. The sensors pointed to something impossible. The midichlorian levels were rising. It was not a normal fluctuation. It was a constant and inexplicable increase. "This shouldn't be happening," muttered one of the geneticists, reviewing the data. "He's absorbing the force like a living sponge." Vader slowly approached the terminal and read the graphs carefully. The answer came in a low tone. Even better. For him, this was not a threat. It was confirmation that he was creating the most powerful being in the galaxy. However, the force seemed to react in an increasingly volatile manner. The lights in the chamber flickered for no reason. Echoes were heard in the empty corridors. Some technicians claimed to have strange visions or dreams after long hours near the tank. One even screamed in the middle of the night, saying he heard a voice whispering his name from inside the clone. Vader was not impressed. But the scientists knew that this was not just biology. Something ancient was awakening there. Vader, even with his cold and calculating nature, began to feel uncomfortable. He was sure of his plan, to forge a perfect weapon, a new Anakin at his service. But what he saw growing in the tube was something beyond his control. The force seemed to move on its own around that body, as if it recognized it, as if it wanted to protect it. Vader began to wonder if he had created an instrument, or unleashed something he could no longer stop. As the body developed, the face became clearer, the features more vivid. It was as if Anakin had been taken from the past, young, intact, about to breathe again. The hands moved slightly for the first time. The eyelids fluttered, but did not open. The clone's heart was beating fast. One of the scientists, perplexed, commented, "His brain activity is already very high, but it's not standard. There's something far above average going on." Vader stood motionless. The image of the old face confronted him. One night, during a routine inspection, Vader entered the chamber and found everything silent. The monitors were off, not because of a malfunction, but because of overload. It was as if the force had burned out the circuits. He approached the tank. The water around the clone glowed in golden tones. There was no alarm signal, but the environment was saturated with energy. Vader slowly raised his hand and felt an intense vibration. The power there was almost suffocating. Suddenly, the clone's eyes opened. Blue, deep, conscious. They stared firmly at Vader. There was no scream, no words, only absolute silence, as if time had frozen. Vader stood still, watching. He did not expect the awakening to occur so soon, nor did he expect it to occur with such awareness. The connection in the force between the two was instantaneous. It was like looking at himself before everything had been destroyed. "Can you hear me?" Vader asked. The clone remained silent, but his eyes followed him. He was not an empty being. There was presence, there was soul. Vader clenched his fists. He could not allow this being to believe he had a will of his own. Not yet. It was not yet time to let him know who he really was. He needed to mold him, control his mind, guide his every step, or he would lose control of his own plan. In the days that followed, the clone kept his eyes open, though he did not speak. The connection to the force intensified with each passing hour. The entire tank seemed to pulsate with his presence. Vader ordered the monitors to be replaced with analog methods, as the energy interference continued to destroy the digital systems. "We will no longer depend on machines. He has already surpassed that," he said. The scientists simply obeyed. Fear prevented them from questioning. Some technicians suggested that the clone be kept in suspension. "He may become unstable," one of them warned. Vader turned slowly. "He is perfect. Instability is what destroys the weak." The man did not insist, but the comment lingered. The clone was already showing mental activity, physical and sensory reactions. He was almost ready to be removed from the tank. And Vader needed to begin training immediately. Vader began to personally monitor the clones every hour. Every breath, every glance, every reaction. He studied every movement, looking for signs of rebellion or submission. But the new Anakin was different. He did not appear fearful or lost. There was something calm and at the same time threatening in his silence. Something that awakened an old memory, the memory of the boy from Tatooine, the slave who would become the destroyer of worlds. On the 12th day, after long moments of observation, Vader gave the order, "Turn off the support. It's time." The tank began to drain slowly. The tubes retracted, the locks opened. The new Anakin fell to his knees on the cold floor of the platform, gasping for breath. His eyes rose, staring at Vader. And there, in that gaze, was something Vader did not expect to see: judgment. The war between master and creation had begun, and the first step had just been taken. Anakin's clone remained kneeling for a few seconds, catching his breath, as if his entry into the world were a brutal rebirth. Vader watched him from above, arms crossed, with the grandeur of an absolute lord. The room was silent, except for the dripping of bacta fluid running down the young man's naked body. Anakin's eyes slowly rose, and for the first time, Vader saw something that surprised him. There was no fear in them. There was curiosity, calm, and strength. And that was exactly what he expected. "Stand up," Vader ordered. Anakin obeyed without hesitation. His movements were still slow, but steady. There was no trembling, no insecurity. It was as if the body already knew what to do. The mind, though newly formed, seemed guided by something beyond experience. Vader wasted no time. He took the young man to a makeshift training room with deactivated combat droids and vibroweapons. "You were born to fight. You will learn from me, and you will obey me." Anakin did not respond. He just watched. Vader activated one of the droids, which quickly charged at him. The clone instinctively dodged to the side and drove his fist into the center of the machine, destroying the core. It was a precise, deadly move. Vader approached slowly, observing every detail. "Very good. Your muscle memory works. The Force flows in you, even if you don't know how to use it." From that day on, training began without pause, without compromise. Vader trained the clone as he had never been trained. Every blow was real, every exercise was a test of survival. Anakin responded with impressive speed, absorbing the lessons with ease. The scientists began to report something even more frightening. Every day, the level of midichlorians continued to grow. No living being had ever had such a high concentration. The clone's body not only sustained the Force, it seemed to attract it like a beacon. "He surpasses the original," whispered one of the technicians. Vader heard, but did not comment. Inside, he knew it was true. Every day, he saw in the young man a strength that even he had not possessed in his days as a Jedi Knight. Anakin used the Force instinctively. He could move objects with his mind, predict attacks before they happened, jump absurd heights. And all this without ever seeming exhausted. It was as if he had been born inside an energy field. One day, during a forced meditation session, Anakin spoke for the first time. "Why am I here?" His voice was calm, firm. Vader approached and replied, "Because you are my successor, my apprentice, and together we will rule the galaxy." The young man lowered his head for a moment, as if absorbing the words. But he did not respond. Vader sensed a slight resistance in the Force, a sign of independent thought, a spark of something he would need to control. Gradually, memories began to surface in Anakin. disconnected but powerful images. A smiling woman with brown hair, a desert planet, temple in flames. Vader noticed the young man's expressions changing during training. "Are you seeing things?" he asked. Anakin nodded. "Dreams. I don't know where they come from." Vader lied. "They are echoes of the Force. You are aligning yourself with your destiny." But inside, he knew the original consciousness was awakening. Even so, the training continued. Vader taught the ways of the dark side with relentless dedication. Hatred as fuel, pain as a weapon, anger as liberation. Anakin learned everything with ease, but never seemed to give in completely. His strikes were precise, lethal, but there was hesitation when he was instructed to kill. Vader pretended not to notice. For now, the focus was on making the body invincible. Later, he would mold the spirit. In an advanced exercise, Anakin destroyed 5 droids armed with training sabers in less than 30 seconds. Vader watched him closely. "You are powerful. Much more than I ever was." Anakin breathed lightly. "Then why do you still train me?" The question caught Vader off guard. "Because only the strongest can defeat the Emperor," he replied. "And together we will bring him down." For the first time, Anakin seemed to react with suspicion. Days later, the scientists brought new data. "Lord Vader, the midichlorians have multiplied once again. He has surpassed any existing record. Not even the original Skywalker file comes close to this." Vader received the report in silence. On the outside, he maintained control. On the inside, he felt something break. He had created something so powerful that perhaps he could no longer control. But still, he would not back down. "Continue the training," he said. "The escalation is not over yet." Anakin began to question more. Why does everything have to be war? Why so much hatred? Vader didn't like that kind of thinking, but he hid it, because that's how power is achieved. Peace is a lie. The clone stared at him intently. What if the truth lies elsewhere? Vader clenched his fists, the Force swirling around him. "You haven't seen what the Emperor is capable of yet. When we see it up close, you'll understand." But deep down, Vader already saw the signs that total submission would not come easily. What was once a simple tool was now beginning to show a spark of autonomy. And that spark, combined with the greatest power in the galaxy, was a threat. Vader knew he had to act fast, before the new Anakin ceased to be an apprentice and became an adversary. The training continued intensely, but Vader knew that only real combat would truly shape Anakin. He created carefully planned missions where the clone could be exposed to the brutality of the galaxy. Targets were assigned, hidden rebels, local leaders who opposed the Empire. "You must eliminate them," said Vader, handing over the coordinates. "Without hesitation. Mercy is weakness." Anakin looked at the data for a few seconds, then nodded. But something in his gaze said that the orders would not be followed so easily. On his first mission, on a planet in the Outer Rim, Anakin confronted a group of armed rebels. Everything went as planned. He defeated them all with ease. But at the final moment, when he was supposed to execute an unarmed leader, he hesitated. The man fell to his knees, pleading. Anakin turned off his lightsaber and walked away. The ship returned with him in silence. Vader was waiting in the hangar. "You let him live." Anakin replied only, "It wasn't necessary." Vader turned away without saying anything, but the tension was becoming unbearable. Other missions failed in the same pattern. Anakin captured, disarmed, defeated, but did not kill. "The Force guides me, and it does not ask for blood," he said at the end of one raid. Vader confronted him in the meditation chamber. "You are refusing your destiny." The young man replied firmly, "Perhaps this is not my destiny." Vader raised his voice. "You are my apprentice. You were created to follow my orders." And then came the unexpected reply, "That is a path I cannot follow." The words struck Vader like lightning. He had heard them before. From Padme, before Mustafar, before the fall. The memory echoed within him like a cry stuck in time. "Where did you hear that?" he asked, approaching. Anakin stared at him. "I didn't hear it. came to me like a memory, but I don't know whose. Vader slowly backed away. This wasn't just defiance. It was the past manifesting itself in the clone's mind, something that should never have survived. In an attempt to break him, Vader took him to a prison camp. He ordered him to choose one at random and execute him just to prove his loyalty. Anakin looked into the eyes of one of the victims, took a deep breath, and replied, "I am not you." In a flash, he activated his lightsaber and pointed it at Vader. "I won't do it." For a moment, silence reigned. Vader activated his own blade, but did not advance. He knew he had no chance. Not against that level of power. Anakin retreated and fled, abandoning the station under heavy pursuit. Imperial ships searched for him throughout the Outer Rim, without success. He flew in silence, searching for answers. Something inside him pulsed, indicating that there was a place where it all began. Tatooine, the desert planet, the cradle of his former life. Shmi's former home. It was as if the Force was calling him there, asking him to start over from the point where everything had been lost. Upon landing on the outskirts of the Lars farm, Anakin walked to the sand-worn entrance. Everything was old, but still standing. Inside, Owen Lars and Beru froze when they saw him. His eyes, his face, his gestures. Everything about him said Skywalker, but they didn't know what they were seeing. Anakin didn't speak. He just watched. And then he heard laughter. A child. Running. A boy with golden hair and a curious look. Luke. The name came to mind as if it had always been there. Luke approached without fear. Anakin knelt down, and the two stared at each other for long seconds, as if something recognized each other, even without explanation. Owen ran inside, calling Beru in panic. "Call Obi-Wan. Now!" The presence of someone so powerful in the Force did not go unnoticed. Minutes later, the hooded figure of Obi-Wan Kenobi appeared on the horizon. He felt the disturbance like a tidal wave, but what he saw when he arrived left him paralyzed. There, kneeling before Luke, was Anakin. Not Vader, not a shadow, but Anakin Skywalker himself. Young, looking the same as he had years ago, with a peaceful glow in his eyes. Obi-Wan stood still, speechless. Anakin turned and, upon seeing him, ran to him with tears in his eyes. "Master!" he cried, hugging him tightly. Obi-Wan, still confused, remained motionless. What is going on?" he asked. Anakin then told him everything. The laboratory, Vader, the plan, the escape. Obi-Wan listened intently, feeling each word like a blade cutting through decades of silence. At the end of the story, he stood motionless. Finally, he looked up at Anakin and said, "Anakin, this is your son, Luke Skywalker." The world seemed to freeze at that moment. The clone looked at the boy again, now understanding everything. The Force within him reacted like a silent explosion. The cycle was closing, but the real battle was yet to come. Luke's name still echoed inside Anakin as he stood up and looked at Obi-Wan. The revelation had changed everything. Now there was more at stake than his own freedom. There was a boy to protect. A son who carried the hope of everything he never had. The Force seemed to have orchestrated all events for this moment to occur. And given what Vader was planning, there was no time to waste. The Empire had to fall, and now it was no longer just for himself. It was for Luke. Anakin and Obi-Wan left the farm and began to plan. The Emperor's location was known, the heavily guarded Imperial Command Center, but vulnerable from within. Obi-Wan suggested that they not involve anyone else. "If we fail, no one else will be at risk." Anakin nodded. He had been born with enough power to defeat Sidious, and Obi-Wan had faced Vader before. Now, together, they would end what had begun years ago. The mission was clear. Kill the Emperor. Save the galaxy. The infiltration began with an old transport disguised as an Imperial cargo ship. The codes still worked. No one suspected anything. They moved like shadows, traversing the corridors of the base to the central core. The plan was simple. Obi-Wan would face Vader, keeping him busy, while Anakin would proceed to the Emperor's quarters. They both knew they might not return. But there was no room for hesitation. The Force guided them as never before. Vader sensed them even before he saw them. He was walking through the corridors when the presence of his former master invaded his mind like thunder. He stopped, turned, and drew his lightsaber. "Kenobi," he said in a low voice. When Obi-Wan appeared, he said nothing. He just activated his blue blade. The duel began right there, between metal columns and echoes of the past. Vader attacked with fury, Obi-Wan with precision, two ghosts settling a long-standing wound. Meanwhile, Anakin walked silently through the upper levels. He felt the darkness thickening as he approached the throne. When the doors opened, there he was, Darth Sidious, sitting calm as if he already knew. "So you are Vader's weapon," said the Emperor. "Interesting. Younger, stronger, but still manipulable." Anakin did not respond. He just activated his lightsaber. Sidious smiled. "Very well. Then die." The confrontation was brutal. Force lightning collided with spinning blades at high speed. Anakin was fast and aggressive, but Sidious was experienced, evil, and knew every trick of the dark side. For a moment, it seemed balanced. But something inside Anakin began to emerge. Something different. The image of Luke, Obi-Wan's touch, Padme's voice. All of this caused the Force to explode inside him. And then he stopped fighting with anger. He began to fight with purpose. Sidious realized it too late. The blade pierced his defense with a perfect spin, and the saber dug into his chest. The Emperor screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the dissipating energy. Anakin stood firm, watching the old tyrant fall. He did not celebrate. He just breathed. The throne of the Empire was empty, and for the first time he did not want it. There was something more important waiting. Luke, and the end of that cycle. He ran back through the corridors and found Obi-Wan kneeling. Before him lay Vader, fallen. His mask cracked, his respirator failing. Obi-Wan looked up and saw Anakin. "He didn't make it." Anakin approached slowly. Vader looked him in the eye, for the first time without hatred. "I was wrong," he said with difficulty. "The mission of the Chosen One is yours now." Anakin held his hand. For a moment, everything was silent, and then Vader was gone. Obi-Wan and Anakin abandoned the base before the central systems imploded. Without the Emperor and without Vader, the core of the Empire collapsed. Troops surrendered. Officers deserted. The control structure crumbled like a sandcastle. In the days that followed, rebel ships took over the outer systems. Alderaan was once again a point of light in the galaxy, and that was where Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Luke flew, carrying with them the hope of a new era. On board the ship, Anakin remained silent. He watched Luke sleeping in Obi-Wan's arms. The Force around the boy was pure, alive. He had saved the galaxy without even knowing it. When they landed on Alderaan, they were greeted by a familiar figure. Bail Organa waited with a look of surprise. And beside him, a young woman with a strong spirit and determined eyes. She seemed to feel something when she saw Anakin, as if the Force was saying what words could not yet express. Obi-Wan placed his hand on Anakin's shoulder and said calmly, "Anakin, this is your daughter, Leia Skywalker."